Hey, fellow Geonteers, those of us like our spirituality with a twist. Okay, continuing on with 9 things that can fuck up your life.
There's,
uh,
there's only 9, but we're like week
we're
18.
stretching this shit out.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Well, we're kind of brainstorming it, right?
Yeah,
And
totally.
we got to the idea of saying, okay, what exactly are these things fucking? What are they standing in the way of? What are they fucking up? And so my lead on this, Daniel, in doing this was trying to think of like the good psychologists I like.
Sure.
Okay, yeah, they're fucking you up psychologically,
Yeah.
right? And I like psychologists that have goals to how people are going to develop, you know?
Okay.
So we did authenticity through Carl Rogers. We did a little bit of individuation through Carl Jung. I wanted to talk today about one of our other favorite psychologists, which is Wilhelm Reich, and
Mm-hmm.
then a little bit about enlightenment, because it's obviously these are obstacles to getting enlightened too.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll just talk about what that means. Plus, I got a couple of like stories about my son and a little bit of meditative experience. And you got stuff to share too. So this will probably be our wrap up episodes of fucking up what.
Fucking
Um,
what?
I had to say one thing because we were talking about the podcast, and I had a great story with my son. We were talking about this, and he was telling me about some podcast, and he was just saying, the number of views it got, and blah blah blah. And it was some crappy thing, And we were just talking about it, and he had the realization, like, well, people are watching it, but it's just a bunch of junk. And then he knows we do this. He's 11. He knows we do this. And then he was like, we were kind of just talking about how it is to get views when you're talking about things that are more deep.
Right.
He had this little kid's observation, but like very good. He just suddenly said, you know, maybe so many people watch this YouTuber or whatever, and there's no value in it whatsoever, right? So no one benefits at all. And he said, you and Daniel do this thing. And even if like not as many people listen as who are going to listen to like, whatever it would be, Mr. Beast or whatever, obviously that's huge. But it wasn't talking about that one. But something big. But like the people who are listening are going to get so much more benefit. So when you really look at it, the amount of benefit that's happening to any person is so small on those. Even if you spread it over to all these people, there's no benefit. But for you guys, tons of benefit because what you're presenting actually has meaning. And he was very positive about it. And he had done this little internal calculation. And I
Mm.
thought, that's good, dude, that you thought it out that way. And he did. He went, actually, it's really good because, okay, maybe the benefits spread against not as many people, but it's like actual benefit, you know,
Mm-hmm.
where you spread it across no benefit across a lot of people, then you're going to get no benefit anyways.
Right.
And I was like, okay, way to go. Way to go. I thought that was just cool that he did that.
It's a nice.
And I got one other thing with him actually, but okay. Well, let me talk a little about Reich.
Yeah.
So I think, authenticity was the expression of your own true inner nature. My son has an opinion about that, which I'll get to. Individuation in Jung was more, can you understand your own inner psyche with all of its complexities and layers, and also understand how the internal and external worlds, spiritual worlds interconnect? Because, Jung sort of sees like the inner and the outer being mirrors of each other.
Mm-hmm.
So the archetypes can be there internally, but they also can be there externally. So can you come to terms with like the mystical aspects of the world, how your inner nature and outer nature, spiritual natures are connecting? And then also, can you get over society? So he thinks about that. For Reich, who I kind of thought of as like the third person with this, what are these obstacles about? And so he definitely thinks that he's talking about the kind of things that we're talking about, for sure. He's talking about these as being obstacles. He has this really famous phrase he calls the emotional plague.
Mm.
And the emotional plague is essentially the things in the outer world that are going to fuck up your life. If you were to boil it down to a simple statement, right? These are the outer parts of the world that will fuck up your life, the emotional plague. And he uses the word plague in kind of an interesting way because he's saying that these things are kind of contagious.
Yeah, I was gonna say it sounds virulent.
Yeah, I think that's his idea. Virulent, epidemic, contagious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, he thinks of it like, it's funny. I was just teaching a class today on Chinese medical infectious disease. And he kind of talks that way. He
Mm.
almost talks about like it's an infection and people catch it from one another. So
There, there's
yeah.
another like I like the way that I don't know if the Hindus or the Vedics do this, but the Tibetans, or at least the Buddhists definitely do. They describe thoughts as having fragrances, as having odors,
Oh yeah, yeah. Sometimes you'll hear that kind of thing. Yeah, yeah.
and so it's sort of like the odor of one can spread to the other. And I think in the confines of your own head, it makes a lot of sense.
I guess it's an analogy to like
SENSE.
an airborne pathogen too, though, or something, right?
Yeah. But even if
Thoughts are like out in the air.
even if
Uh-huh.
you say it as a pun, right, it makes a lot of sense. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, I didn't. Okay, I got your fun.
Yeah, yeah,
I didn't. I didn't pick up on it.
yeah.
I missed the sense.
Yes. But it is something that's spreadable, something that, like you're saying, is
Mhm.
contagious. And
Yeah, bad
ideologies
thought.
are contagious.
We're living in that time.
I
It
think they've always been.
contagious.
I think it's always been that way. Just there, it
Yeah,
spreads more easily now. Like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
ideas spread more quickly than viruses because of all the various mediums of connection.
But we were talking about like the way that things move through, like again, the things that you're interested in, like especially social media things and all that. Like they are viral,
Yeah,
uh,
there you
right?
go.
And they're
Contagious.
contagious. Yeah. So I always was amazed when Reich had this language that I always felt was kind of ahead of his time or something. He's ahead of his time in a lot of ways. We did some episodes on him back in the day, so we don't have to do his whole backstory. But yeah, he's ahead of his time. A lot of these guys are, or these psychologists are. So, anyways, he talks about this emotional plague, and it's partially one of my favorite things, which are the sociocultural ideas, right?
Mm-hmm.
That kind of get spread around and everyone gets kind of infected with them.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other part is probably just bad ideas just in general, or bad thoughts just in general start to spread. Sometimes it's hard to say where the sociocultural and individual ends in that. But anyways, that's the emotional plague idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then like the way he talks about it then is that this then not only becomes obstructions that are like psychological, but he says they're obstructions that are physical and energetic.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So ultimately he says you'll take these things into the system, these 9 things that'll fuck up your life in this emotional plague way, and they'll get into the system of the person. And then, partially we can try to figure out with psychology, but then we're getting a little bit more into some of our Qigong things and our Chinese medical things and meditative things where they become part of like the entirety of your being almost, right?
I think the episode that we did on that was called The Emotional Plague, actually, and that was a while back. So for those who are listening, if you want to circle back, we talk about his ideas of somatization, or the embodying of these, psycho-emotional afflictions, and how he viewed them and which part of the body had what and whatever. We're not gonna go over that, but we kind of broke that down pretty well. And I think it was either called Wilhelm Reich or The Emotional Plague, something like this. But probably from about a year ago or so.
Yeah, because he does go to what you're talking about. He says like specific emotions will get lodged in certain places, right?
Yeah,
Thinks fear is somehow around the eyes and
yeah,
anger, and these things get around the jaw, and then this, suppressed sadness through the throat. He has like ideas around
yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And if you're a meditative person, and we've been trying to do that subjective meditative part too, because we were doing the mischievous mind.
The
Took me a second to
mischievous
get
mind.
it.
Yes.
Yeah. In the episodes that we're talking about things that will fuck up your life, number 5,
Hmm.
mischievous mind. Um, that if you're a meditative person, you start to notice this for sure. And then
Hmm.
even if you never heard of the dude, you just start to notice like, oh yeah, there's certain emotions that seem to be lodged in certain places in me, right? And they're not just emotions; they're actually tied into ideas. The whole thing, true. So yeah, so he talks about it as being physical blocks and emotional blocks, and these end up sort of, yeah, again, the outer things get internalized and then begin to like not only become obstacles in the way that you kind of think about 9 obstacles out in the world or something like that, but 9 obstacles that become embedded in you.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I guess if you go a little farther into Taoist and Buddhist parts of this, and there are Taoist people who will talk about this even in our field of Chinese medicine. His name doesn't come up too much for us, but there's one of the people in our field of traditional Chinese medicine who's kind of a Taoist person and traditional Chinese medical person is Jeffrey Yuen. And then ultimately he'll say, like, once it's in the system in this way, you'll carry that stuff on with you into the next lives too, if you want to get really deep into that.
Mm.
Right.
And what does he talk about passing it forward
I don't,
genetically?
so I think I think he believes that, but I haven't heard him talk about that as much.
Mm-hmm.
But what he'll talk about is, once it's kind of there in the system,
Mm.
Chinese medicine will sometimes talk about a person being like three treasures meshed together: their physical body, their what they call the Jing, which includes the genetics that you're talking, like
Yeah,
Daniel's talking
yeah,
about, right?
yeah.
And then, the energetics of the person, like the energies that go through the channels and the chakras and all that kind of stuff. And then ultimately the Shen of the person, right? And then, the general understanding would be ultimately when any of our lives ends, that's Shen and part of the Qi will separate from the physical body, that those treasures will come apart. But then he says, these things get kind of like, I think in the language you would use, they get uploaded, right? Using that kind of data language that sometimes you like to use,
Mm.
Daniel.
Sure.
Yeah, it works.
Mm.
We can understand that.
Mm-hmm.
You go into the cloud,
Yeah, you go right in the cloud.
you go into the cloud,
No
the Tibetan
problem.
Book of the Dead, you're in the cloud,
That's it.
and you have all this data associated with you, all this karmic information, and then
Yeah.
you carry that through, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So he definitely talks about that part. I think he does believe that it goes through the line of Jing. I think he does think that's true, but I've heard him talk less about that.
Mm.
But this other thing that you're going to carry it on, which I guess gives another little oomph of like why it's good to like work this shit out now. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, yeah.
Fix this now. And I've been trying to be tough on myself as we've been doing these episodes too. Like, where are my issues with this? If I start thinking about these 9 things, and like, obviously, I know where it is. It's number 3 that we still haven't talked about. It's all relational. Every goddamn issue is that, because most of the other stuff I've like done fine.
Well, for you it's that, but for others it's,
No, no, for me, I mean, I'm
yeah,
like
yeah,
being honest
yeah,
about myself. For someone
yeah.
else, it might be career, or
Sure.
it might be insecurity, or it might be, oh, I have lots of things around my family of origin
Yeah.
that's bothering me. And we'll get to other ones too, that we'll
Mm-hmm.
get to as we go. I think a lot of them, it's a good tool though, right? To like
Agree. Yeah.
then reflect back on your life. Okay, where are my issues? Where do I have these things? And I'm like, I am trying to be motivated. Like, okay, if this is like, if I find one of these 9 where my issues are, I'll look at it from my own point of view. Then it's up to me to try to like fix that and get this done, so I don't carry this shit on in the way that, a Taoist or a Buddhist person would talk.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. Yeah. I know. I don't want to put you on the spot, but which of these have you been thinking about? Any of the ones we've done so far seem like they're big ones for you?
I mean, we always end up talking about um work, for right now.
Uh-huh.
And work and this fifth one, just a line from the book here. In your youth, you were unwilling to cultivate, and in your old age, you continue to injure your spirit. Even when you become lose your vitality and become ill, the mischievous mind still refuses to wake up. And like that in particular is always with me, and currently I have a family member in the hospital who is stable for now, but unfortunately has had the last 7 or 8 years of just not, I mean, probably longer, just they're older now, but just taking really poor care of their health. And that's just
Yeah.
on a physical. And we talked about like a last episode, I think it was, where we talked about like these 3 ideas. The episode, this one will be called Fucking Up What, but this is kind of like an extension of last episode where we're talking about like, okay, we're referencing, last episode was called Preparing for the Journey. But as you're preparing for the journey, we're going to help, identify what's in the way, right? That's what these
Oh, that's right.
obstacles.
That's what you're talking about last episode. I'm remembering
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So we're talking about what's in the way, and we're like, okay, these Taoists in this book in particular, but the Taoists in general look at sort of like health, longevity, and immortality, and things that you should be polishing as you go on, right? Polishing your health so you can have a less suffering in your existence, working harder to be healthier in a multitude of ways for a longer period so you can live longer to work on other things, and ultimately you're working on the kind of like what they call immortality or enlightenment, or however you want to determine that. But like you got to have them, and they have to be in order, you know like it's important. It's very, very difficult to have a deep meditative practice if you're constantly sick. It
Yeah.
just, it's very difficult. It's not that it can't be done, but it makes it much harder because you're ill, um and I'm just watching people, and I work with a wide variety of clients, as do you, Eric. And I've been having some older people in their 80s and I'm going to their homes and helping them out a little bit. And it's just like, man, you're really preparing for the harder parts of your life with what you do right now, physically,
Mm.
emotionally, and spiritually, you know? So like you really got to put the work in when you have the opportunity to put the work in, because it culminates as your life goes on. And so that one for me really has been clear and present over the last, I mean, really for the last several years, but particularly the last like month, it's like very, very focused for me. And I tell my clients and patients who take care of themselves, I literally tell them, you should make your kids, your children, thank you because you take care of yourself and you are easing their burden when you get older. So they should be thanking their lucky stars that you give a shit about your health as opposed to just, watching TV and eating frozen food. You know what I'm saying? Like it's a thing.
My mom's going through the thing where she's starting to develop dementia. So, we both talked about, stuff going on in our own lives with family
Mm.
members. She's doing okay, but from the way you're framing it, she's an 84-year-old lady, and all things being equal, she's lived very independently. She's a very independent person, and she hasn't put that much burden on people, to be honest, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I guess I'm, would be thankful for that to her, right?
Yeah.
She's been able to maintain her own self-sufficiency in a very impressive way for, a long time. Yeah.
There's a fine
She's also
line.
really like 3 months older than Joe Biden. That's a joke.
and
And a few
and
years older than Trump. Yeah.
there's a fine line between like blaming people and trying to empower them. It's like you can help yourself by being healthier. So try X, Y, or Z, or don't do X, Y, or Z. I mean, this is the struggle being a practitioner, Eric, as you know. It's like people come in with issues and you're like, what would be really good if you stopped doing blank. And they're like, well, I don't, and you're like, I don't know. I'm just saying you're here asking me my opinion and I'm trying to help you, but whatever. Um, and especially when people are down, you don't want to kick them while they're down,
Yeah, yeah.
but at the same time, like you got to keep it real. So like the way in which people can communicate that with to their loved ones or, whatever. I don't know. I always try and just lead by example and say, like, I've been living this lifestyle for a really long time. It's not exactly easy. I'm not a robot. I have desires and wants and things that I have to sacrifice, in order to try and maintain what I believe to be a kind of a healthy lifestyle, physically, mentally, energetically, whatever. And if I could do it, anybody can. I'm definitely not special, in any way, shape, or form. So, anyways, that's what's been alive, and I mean that's what we're doing here, anyways. Is trying to provide some of
It
these
gets
kind
me,
of motivational factors.
what you're talking about gets me thinking about this. I mean, I love doing this podcast because it's very meaningful for me. It makes me self-reflect, right?
Yes.
And it's also, though, I get that, I've been trying to talk with people about this. Let me give you the example with my son. I'll do my son example number two.
Sure.
Set this up. So we were out getting some pizza. We were going to do some chess. He's a little chess fiend. And at some point, we were eating the pizza, put the chess pieces away for a little bit. And I was like, well, let me throw a theory at you. Because he's 11 and he can have some very like interesting little reactions to things. So I was thinking, well, what would his reaction to this be? And I wanted to see if it seemed like it made sense to him. And he has a little contrarian streak in him. So I was interested to see what he would say. So I basically was trying to do a little Kyle Rogers thing where I said, okay, here's how this guy thinks. Tell me what you think. See if this makes sense to you. Use your little chess brain on this. Riddle this out, Magnus. Magnus Carlsen, uh, best chess player in the world. Use some of that mentality. So I was like, okay, let's go, Magnus. Tell me what you think. And so I was going, okay, Rogers is talking about authenticity, right? And the things that tend to suppress authenticity are these external conditions of worth. He uses this phrase, conditions of worth. And I said, okay, so that's what happens. So if your authentic parts of who you are suppressed by these conditions of worth, outer demands, what tends to happen with people is they create kind of like a false self. They create like a kind of a false self concept, an artificial version of themselves. And Rogers is all on this thing that's created by this, So now you have a kind of a split person inside, right? where on the one hand, they're identifying with this sort of false version of who they are that's being crushed by these kinds of being induced by these conditions of worth. And then the authentic parts of themselves sometimes come out in certain ways, but it gets kind of lost, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the
Mm-hmm.
person gets internally confused about who they really are. So they walk around in kind of this confusion. And going back to some of the stuff we talked about last year, Carl Jung went through this process for sure. He talks about this in his memoirs. I felt there were two sides to my personality, one that was showing to the outer world, and then one that probably was more me, that was like stuck inside. It would come up in my private moments and things like that, but I couldn't get them out into the world, or couldn't figure out how to do it. So I'm laying this on my son, and I said, well, where do these conditions of worth come from? And I was kind of going, well, they come from uh, society, culture. And he was like, yes, I got that. That's true. Like, he understood that. And I was saying, well, these things a lot of times come through the people around you, the people in the community,
Mm-hmm.
the emotional plague. And I kind of said, like, well, this is like kind of this emotional plague. I can't remember if I used that phrase with him or not. Maybe I didn't, but it is the emotional plague, right?
Mm-hmm.
And or it's like Carl Jung would talk about, in terms of people not being able to individuate. So I laid the whole thing out for him. And I said, well, what do you think? And then he looked at it, and I drew it on a piece of paper, like a little diagram, a little flow chart. And he went, yeah, I get that. There's something true about that. And then he kind of gets this idea, like he'll say this back to me. And obviously it's like moments where you could see like, well, this is my karmic kid. Because he'll go like, yeah, you can't do the normal things. You can't do them because they tend to make you unhappy. And I'm like, yeah, you got it. You got it. But the funny thing is, if you show that to adults, adults sometimes don't see it.
Correct.
It's almost like the emperor has no clothes kind of a thing. Or maybe it's, adults have so much invested already in what they're doing that it's hard for them to look at that, you know? And you were talking about talking with patients and saying, oh, it's hard to say to a patient, your diet is like, we got to change it. People don't want to hear that.
No. Nope.
No, they don't want to hear it, you know? And they might even say like, well, what am I paying you to, you're supposed to fix that. I'm paying you,
Exactly.
why would I pay you to fix my diet?
Yeah, right. They're like, oh, this is job security. I'm like,
Yeah, you're supposed to do the things that make me allowed to do this.
mm-hmm.
That's people's reactions. And I've kind of tried to run this past adults just as an experiment, just going, hey, what do you think? And people kind of shrug or something, even people that I think are, spiritually interested people. So I was like, that's interesting, you know? And it made me, the reason I went to it, I knew I was going to talk about this anyways, because I just thought his reaction was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
He'll
Mm-hmm.
talk this way sometimes. Now, obviously, he's heard me say stuff like that, but I do think he believes it. My daughter wasn't quite as much like that. When I would talk this way with my daughter, she'd be like, well, don't crap on my cornflakes. I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to enjoy my shit. But my son is a little different. He's like, yeah, I see the logic of that. He could see it. He used his little chess player mind, and he kind of like projected through. And he was like, yeah, I could see that that's a problem. You know?
Eric, it reminds me of one of my friends who I was hanging out with recently. They're going through some kind of transitions in their life, looking for new job because they were getting laid off from the previous one, and rightfully and intelligently, emotionally, they started meditating and they started doing therapy. They started going to see a therapist, and they saw this guy one time and had waited like, I don't know, a month and a half to get in to see this person, and they were like, well, it would be really great if I could find some purpose, and purpose through my work, because I'm working and I want to try and give back in a certain way, and that just seems like the most opportune way to like do two things at once, which is work because I'm going to have to, and I have to support myself and my family, but then also have something that like gives to my soul a little bit. And the guy was like, well, I don't know, I think you could just work, and be happy that you have work, and volunteer, right? And so, my friend was like, so what you're telling me is that like I should be happy being a father a couple hours a day, volunteering an hour or two a week on something, and then do something that is just kind of like meh, and spend 2/3 of my life doing this thing and a few hours doing the other things, and that's going to fulfill me. And he's like, yeah, that's about right. My brother's like, I don't accept that. My buddy was just like, I don't take this. And so he never ended up seeing this guy again. for professionally, and he found somebody else who agreed with him, and could and listen to him, even if they agree or don't agree, they at least were able to hold space and withhold their own personal judgment, but say, yes, I understand, as they're literally, as a therapist, they're doing what they're passionate about. So how is it that you are not going to encourage somebody else to do the same thing for them? But I told him, I was like, you were talking directly to the matrix. That was it right there. If the emotional plague was amorphosized into a therapist, that's what it would be. And that's exactly what it would say, you know?
Yeah.
Jump
There's
back in the rat wheel and keep running. Don't worry. Don't worry. They'll feed you occasionally, and one of those foods will be a present,
just
but keep
just
running.
there's two pills. Don't take the one that no.
No, get that out
No,
of here.
not that pill.
Not that pill.
Out the window. Here,
Yeah.
take this one.
Yeah.
That's the Matrix thing. I had to clarify. I was laughing. You were telling the story because you told me the story earlier, and I love the delivery.
Mm,
We had talked about it a little bit like pre-podcast. I was like, oh, here comes the story. It's a good
yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um. So yeah, it's well, I mean, I have so okay, from Reich's point of view, he would say that, even if someone's a mental health person, they might still have the emotional plague.
Yes.
And he
Yep.
made a big deal about this. He says if you're going to do therapy, you better not have the emotional plague.
Yeah.
You got the emotional plague, you're gonna spread it.
And
And the
and I
patient
I, I
catch the
think,
emotional plague from you.
yeah, and,
Yeah.
and I think that, like, for people who are listening newly, or who are have been rocking with us for some time, like, we're talking to you. We're talking to our listeners. Of course, we're talking to our listeners. That's inherent in the project. But I mean, we're talking to the people who this hits, and to you who are listening right now. Like, boom, I'm talking to you. Your attention. You're on your phone. You're on headphones. You're driving in your car. You're watching on YouTube, whatever it is, however you're consuming it. Like, I'm talking to you. If you believe that you want to do something different, or you want to fulfill something inside of you that feels like it's an authentic expression of yourself, you're not harming somebody else, obviously, in the process. You're doing good. You are going to meet resistance, and sometimes you're going to meet resistance from people who you don't think would provide it.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is your opportunity to hunker down and clarify what it is that you are actually wanting. And so I was talking with my buddy, as I mentioned, he's looking for a job currently. He's in between, things. And he's happy for me that I, work for myself, have my own, business. Essentially, I am my own business, whatever. Um, but that obviously it requires work. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not just easy. And I said, well, it's funny because when people ask me what I do, more often than not, and I wanted to share this and get your thoughts. I've been telling people I'm an artist, actually.
Mm. Yeah.
I
Okay.
don't tell them that I'm a, a trainer or a physical therapy type person, fitness professional. And I don't tell them that I'm a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine. And I don't tell them that I'm an herbalist or, whatever. I tell them I'm an artist. And the reason why I told him this, and why I'm saying this to, get your thoughts, is because it doesn't come from a place of identity. I don't want to, I am owning what we say when we had that episode, like a work, identity, and you. Like, I
Mhm.
also am conscious of not identifying myself as a particular thing, because I am many things, as you are, as all of us are nowadays. We all have to hustle. You know what I'm saying? That's just the nature of the business. But we're interested in different shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's part of it. But I would rather identify myself with the creative process, which to me is art of any type. So when someone asks, "Oh, what kind of art do you do?" I say, "Well, acoustic, I play music, I record podcasts, some, visual art, I guess, in some way, shape, or form." I mean, I don't know what I do. I'm an artist in the way that I want to be creative
Medical
all the
arts.
time. Right.
Medical
Healing
arts.
arts, you know,
Meditative arts, spiritual
meditative.
arts.
Exactly. And so he really enjoyed that. And I felt like that was the appropriate thing, because it's not about, again, the tantric view. It's not what you do, but how you do it. And I want to try my best to do things as an artist. Does that?
Yeah, it's interesting for me because this does tie the whole conversation together. For me, I'm very into probably because we're diagnosticians and it fits into what we were talking about earlier. You were saying it's hard to get people to change their lifestyles. I try to like I was talking with somebody recently about this, and I was saying like this emotional plague, conditions of worth for Carl Rogers, these are like Newton's laws to me. Like
Mm,
they're real,
mm.
they're true. As much as it's true that if you like, an apple falls from the tree and hits you on the head, that's a law of nature. These are laws of nature to me. And it can sometimes sound a little bit, I know, harsh or something, because you're saying, like,
Yeah.
listen,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is hard, but like,
Yes.
look at this honestly. Like, look at what my son is like noticing too. If I do just the normie things, I'm going to get normie outputs, and they're probably going to be bad, because of the emotional plague, because of the conditions of worth. And it's harsh, man. It's really harsh. In the sense that like you're given but it's not coming from a place of like it's coming from a place of wanting to help, really, you know, and watching people struggle and going, okay, the way to get out of this, the way the tantras say to get out is don't get stuck in mundane views of the world and mundane ways of seeing things. Don't get stuck in them. They'll fuck
Mm,
your shit up.
mm-hmm.
These things will
Mm-hmm.
fuck your shit up,
Yeah.
Anyways, to the creative part, then, I'm very like, I like the way you can kind of riff on this Carl Jung thing where he says, some people are struggling just to get by and their space is to get to a place of stability. Perfectly understandable, right?
Right.
But then he says, if you're in this type 2 level 2 space where your life is stable and it just stops there, it's going to be bad, right? He just calls it. And he says the thing that gets you out of that is the artistic mode, right?
Boom.
The creative and the spiritual mode. That takes you out of that. That's the leap out. And we've talked about this in different episodes before.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
wrapping this up together, but it's like when you brought up creative, like ding, 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 those alarms went off in my head because that's as a clinician, that's the diagnosis and that's the solution, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tracing it back to people like Jung and Rogers and the psychologists we're trying to reference here, that's the thing that solves the problem, right? To make that leap into the part that's creative. And it's I know you weren't thinking about that when you were talking. You weren't. You were coming at it from your own space. But the minute you said that, I'm like, ding, ding, ding. That's the diagnostician going off of me, going, yes, that's the solution to that problem, right? And that
So
gets you into the deeper parts of who you are, gets you into the archetypal part of who you are, gets you into your true nature, if you're Carl Rogers, or even your Buddha nature, if you want to look at that spiritually, right?
so would you say that the emotional plague, the virus of the emotional plague infects your creativity?
I think it's like a killer thing to the T cells of your creativity,
So create
HIV for your creativity or something like that.
creativity or AVE takes out the T's.
Yeah, because I used to do HIV. So what does HIV do? It kills your cells that are trying to like do their jobs. It gets inside,
Mm-hmm.
kills them, right?
Yeah.
But maybe it's a creativity killer. Since we're doing Reich today, I guess the other one, and we'll run out of time with the things we were going to do, but with the Reich thing, he also brings up that this is kind of a killer for love, the
Mm,
emotional plague, because your love starts, I guess, stops, it loses that authentic thing. It gets enmeshed with emotional plague things.
mm,
And I'm a little bit like riffing on what he's saying, but what he says is when you get rid of the emotional plague, something really interesting happens. You're able to like love in a much more real way because you're more you, right?
mm-hmm,
You're more authentically you. So your love relationships with people get a lot deeper, a lot more meaningful, right?
mm-hmm,
A lot more true. They're not meshed up with like weird viral emotional plague stuff. So it's
mm-hmm,
maybe, I think he would say it's a love killer on some level too.
mm,
And but he reverses it. When you get rid of the emotional plague, you love in a more real way. And then he says you share more really in a more real way because you feel like you have a lot to give, right?
mm,
And you feel more of the emotions of love and connection. So you just feel more like you're a giver. But the blocks of the emotional plague, they stop you from being able to do this, is his clinical observation.
mm,
So when you remove these things, people get much more naturally kind of loving, they get much more natural kind of giving. And then to get to what you were saying, they get much more naturally creative.
Mm.
And he uses that kind of thing. What do people want to do? They want to love, they want to share pleasurable experiences, positive experiences, and they want to create. They want creative work. So it's awesome that you went to that place because it's exactly in these fucking notes I had in front of me.
Well,
It's a creativity, killer. So, that's a spiritual truth. If two people start talking in different places and find their way back to the
they
same
found their way
words,
back in the middle. Yeah.
boom, there you
It's
are.
like what those two characters in what's that movie with the dogs and they're eating
Oh, it's like, yeah, you and I are like going to end up with a little smooch at the end, Daniel.
eating the spaghetti noodle. You know what is that?
It's the
Bambi?
two.
No, that's not Bambi. What is that?
Yeah, Babby's about the
That's
Lady
a
and the
tree.
Tramp. Lady
Lady
and
and
the
the
Tramp.
Tramp.
You're gonna make me be
I
lady. I can tell you're gonna take the tramp, and I'm gonna have
I'm
to
the
be.
tramp for sure.
You're gonna make me be lady. Okay.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I don't. I almost have kind of a tramp stamp. I have a big tattoo down my back, so that's close enough.
I'll say one other thing before we bounce on
Yeah.
this, maybe, because that was the other thing that kind of hit me. I said I was going to talk about meditating on these names of God.
Why
So
don't
I
we
did.
save it? Because I don't know that does it fit?
Yeah. Okay. We'll save it.
Yeah, we're burying it at the end. I mean, there's
Yeah.
only like
Very good.
3% of the population that goes all the way to the end, anyways. And if you made it this far, golf clap, golf clap. Yes, you did wonderful. Good job for your attention. But we do appreciate everybody listening, and feel free to hit us up at ginandtantra@gmail.com. Leave a comment in the YouTube video, like, subscribe, smash the share button, not the subscribe button, smash the share button. That's the one I want. Um, you know, leave us a 5-star review if you can on the Apple Podcasts. We have a Instagram, ginandtantra@gmail.com. Everybody knows the drill with this. I say this every time, but we appreciate everybody listening. This is a labor of love. We are brought to you today by our motherfucking selves, as we always like to say.
Yeah.
So we
Right around
appreciate
our motherfucking selves. Yeah.
the love and the feedback. It keeps our infinite flames lit, even though they're going to keep burning anyways. But we like to have our a little more oxygen, breathed on them a little bit by people sharing their experience and their consumption of what we're doing. So feel free to hit us up, in any and all of the places. And yeah, thanks for listening. And for Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.